part. Excellent, we're recording. So again, my name is Lindsay Glassner. I am the BirdSleuth K-12 Outreach Coordinator at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and tonight's webinar is all about discussing gardening for birds. And specifically, we will be focusing on how we can benefit and either create new gardens or revitalize or expand gardens and make them more bird friendly. And we'll also be talking about our BirdSleuth Garden Grants. So for those of you who are new to our webinar series, the platform we use is called Zoom. What you'll see probably on your slide, either in the top, potentially at the bottom, you're going to look for your Q&A. Again, if you have any questions that may get lost in the chat window as we move along, you're welcome to put them in the Q&A or just save those questions. And then we'll have the chat window. Now the chat window, I recommend you can, back here, you can exit full screen. When you open the chat window, it'll just dock to the side. This is very valuable just to let everybody know. Please select when you are sending messages. It's either going to be a drop-down menu or two buttons that look like this to send to all panelists and participants. For those of you who may have been looking at the chat window earlier, it probably just looks like a bunch of comments from me to nobody else, and that's because all the messages coming in from you guys were to panelists only. By saying to everyone, that allows us to have more of a dialogue and others know what questions you're asking. So with that said, let's test out the chat window real quick. If you want, you're welcome to just put panelists for your personal information, but I do encourage you guys after this section, please make sure you're sending to all participants. Please let me know in the chat window who you are, where you're from, what your role is as an educator, and if you feel like it, let us know if you have a garden or not at your educational site. Excellent. From Phoenix, we have homeschool. We do have people of gardening, South Carolina, Audubon, New York, Ohio, Illinois. Originally from Ithaca. Well, you're always welcome back, Jen. Detroit, AP Environmental Sciences. No garden currently, Kathy. Interesting. Okay, so it looks like from what I'm seeing, we have a great mix of people from a diversity of educational backgrounds, both formal teachers, STEM teachers, homeschools, environmental educators, and also ranging from all across the country in varying age groups, from kindergarten, first grade, all the way up into high school with environmental sciences and APs. And a mix both of public and private schools. But most of you seem to have a garden, though there are a few who are missing it, it looks like, which is not a problem at all. Excellent. Well, thank you very much. This helps me get perspective as to who I'm talking with today. So that chat window is going to be our main communication between myself and you guys. And I do encourage you, for those of you who may just be joining in, again, I am on my own tonight. I usually have somebody here help me manage the chat window, but because I'm by myself, again, if you have any questions, please just use the Q&A window or hold your questions till the end of the webinar. So currently, I'm sitting somewhere in the middle of this building at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology at Ithaca, New York. And the lab is a membership-driven institution where our mission is to interpret and conserve the Earth's biological diversity through research, education, and citizen science focused on birds. Now, specifically, I am the outreach coordinator for BirdSleuth K-12. And what we do at BirdSleuth is take all the knowledge and information that's happening at the lab, and we develop innovative resources and provide training opportunities that are building science skills and inspire young people to connect to local habitats, explore biodiversity, and engage in citizen science projects. Again, my name is Lindsay Glassner. I clearly did not edit the slide. Usually Kelly Schaefer is here to help me, but she's not. So in this webinar, we are all talking about gardening for birds. Now, we're going to go through the first 35 minutes or so will be techniques and strategies on how to create successful gardening. So for some of you who have not started a garden, there will be some good tips in there. For some of you who maybe previously had a garden and needs it to be revitalized, giving you strategies on how you can make it successful and sustainable while also helping birds. We're then going to spend the rest of the webinar, the last 20-25 minutes or so, and we'll specifically talk about the BirdSleuth Garden Grant opportunity. I'm assuming many of you who are attending this webinar are aware of our grant opportunity. So in that latter half of the webinar, I'll go over all the details of the grant, and I will dedicate the majority of that time to answering any questions you may have and ensuring that your application to the grant is the best it can be. So we are reaching, for this BirdSleuth Garden Grant, we are coming into our 3rd year of this program, and this program is sponsored wonderfully by Alaska Fertilizer, which creates fish emulsion organic fertilizer. And due to their generous support, we've had 2 years thus far of working with schools across the United States. We've gathered a lot of feedback from those schools, and we want to share the advice that they have given us about how to ensure a successful garden. Now, this is incredibly important, these first 2 aspects, for those who are just starting out with no garden whatsoever or are looking to recreate or revitalize a neglected garden. The first step is to seek approval. Make sure that you actually have approval from the appropriate people to actually create the garden itself. Now, that may, depending on what your garden plans are, you might not need a lot of approval, or you could need a significant amount. It really depends on your educational site and how lenient your principals or districts may be when it comes to outdoor learning, which unfortunately is a truth in many situations. However, what goes hand in hand with seeking approval is to get staff support. So staff doesn't just include the people who dictate yes or no you can make a garden, but staff also needs to include fellow teachers, parent-teacher organizations or associations, your community, and most importantly, I would say, would be maintenance staff. All too often, and we've heard quite a few horror stories about this in the applications we receive, that a garden was created, it was really spearheaded by a champion teacher. However, come summertime, during the teacher couldn't be there the entire time, and so unfortunately, the maintenance staff wasn't aware of what was happening, and the garden was either neglected. For one garden situation we learned about, it was native grass area because it was in the prairie lands, and they just mowed over all of the native grasses, and the garden was completely destroyed. We've heard stories of people having their gardens completely torn out and paved over. And unfortunately, that is due to a lack of communication and lack of support from maintenance staff, from people higher up. And so those first 2 aspects of seeking approval and getting staff support are vital. The other aspect of staff support I really want to make sure people consider is don't be the sole champion of the garden. It's great to be the person who gets a kick started, but make sure you have additional support outside of yourself. This could be a specific grade. An entire grade is depending on the garden, or an entire school is dependent on the garden. Try, if you want to go towards the vegetable route, embed your community where kids can take home the produce that they have grown so your community comes invested, or get that produce into a cafeteria. So again, it's having a life outside of you by yourself. Though champions are great with gardeners, unfortunately that tends to lead to, as soon as that champion is indisposed, then the garden is neglected. So we really want to talk about then how can we, once we have those gardening steps, how do we make and choose the best location for your garden? There could be logistical aspects we need to consider, such as, is there water close enough near your garden? Another horror story I've heard in applications is people were all excited, they got their approval, and the district person said, yeah, build your garden in this courtyard here. They built their beautiful vegetable garden, they were very excited about it, and then when it came to maintaining the garden, they realized there was no water outlet near them at all. And so they had to carry buckets and buckets of water every week to try and maintain the health of their plants because they didn't consider simple things such as water source. Another situation would be, where is your sunlight? What is the soil quality? And these are really great factors to consider when looking about your location. One resource I highly recommend is the Nature Conservancy's Nature Works Everywhere program. Now, the Nature Conservancy is a partner to the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and they collaborate with us through one of our citizen science projects called Habitat Network. And I'll take you through the Habitat Network website in just a moment. However, they also have their own gardening program, and that's called Nature Works Everywhere. And they also have grants available. I know funding is a big issue, so if you can, try and get as much funding as possible and consider applying to their grant opportunity as well. But along with the funding resources they provide, they also have full curricula around gardening as well as helpful tutorial videos. So this here is just a screenshot from one of their videos around how to choose the best location for your garden. And the factors they really highlight, again, are the sunlight. Are you getting enough sun for the types of plants or crops or produce that you want to grow? Do you have appropriate soil? Think about your soil and what plants will best thrive in there. Do you need to provide enrichments into your soil? Or do you have toxins in your soil and are forced to use raised garden beds? Doing the soil samples is quite important. Thinking about water. Water is necessary for plants to grow. However, water can also be detrimental. Is there too much water? Will it kill your plants? Or is there too much water that's causing runoff and removing the nutrients off the surface? So your soil is being taken away through runoff. So these are all different considerations that Nature Works Everywhere through their tutorial videos have you think about and have you start to look into and analyze. Now, one suggestion I highly recommend is don't just do this analysis on your own. For those of you who are starting off from scratch with gardening, get the kids involved. Have them go through the process of understanding why they need to test the soil and how they can test the soil, or doing studies on time of day and daylight. Have them think about those and be involved in the beginning processes of planting a garden. For those of you who already have an existing garden that you either want to revitalize or expand, again, get those kids involved and do regular tests. You can make it monthly or once a semester or once a year where they're doing soil analysis. They're assessing the water levels. They're assessing the sunlight that's available to their plants. These are really valuable skills that are not only connecting kids to the garden, to nature, but those are skills that are incredibly valuable for their life in the future as well. So that's just one option, making sure you're choosing your location wisely. And one aspect I would also add on to that is considering your climate. Now, we have supported so far 21 schools across the United States with our garden grants, and we're very excited to basically doubling the number of schools we're supporting this year around. But what that's done is we supported schools all the way from Florida to New Mexico to Maine, even up into Alaska. And you can imagine that each school is going to have their own climate that they'll have to adapt to. The school in Alaska is not going to have the same climate as the school in New Mexico. When our partners in New Mexico, it was a Native American school, and they shared photos, it reminded me of just how dry it is in there, where their soil is not as healthy and rich as dark as what it looks like in this picture. It is dry, it is sand, and that's a consideration they need to take into aspect. They also need to consider how much rain are they going to get. Now for them, they went with the native plant root, and they specifically focused on using species of plants that are already adapted to their climate. And that's a big emphasis that I want you guys to consider with gardening. So taking a step back, we really want to focus on gardening is amazing, and even if you want to focus on just producing produce in your garden, there are still small things that we can do to help birds. So in that chat window, I want you guys to brainstorm what are different techniques or different activities or different strategies that we can implement in a garden to help birds. So again, in that chat window, I'm going to ask you guys to make sure you respond with it saying to all panelists and attendees, and share with me, what do you think we can do in gardens to help birds? Yeah, so specifically planting bird-friendly plants, looking at food sources, those being native plants, reducing pesticide or insecticide, providing cover or shelter, nesting sites, the main components of habitat, food, water, cover, space, attracting insects and having insects becoming here as a food source. Considering care like that, considering the fact that you could be on a migratory path as well. Yeah, you guys are brainstorming a lot of great strategies, and you came up with many things we have. Now, one thing nobody mentioned, though I'm sure you wouldn't necessarily consider this at a school or educational site, is trying to avoid any free roaming cats. I have yet to meet a school that has a school cat. But if by chance you are that one educational site that does have a school cat, just try and keep that cat indoors. That would be very beneficial, especially during that nesting season as well as the wintering the feeding season. So during the wintertime, birds are more likely, your resident bird species are more likely to come to feeders to find and get that extra food source, and that is an easy target for cats. And then during the nesting season, that's going to be your spring to summertime period. That's when you're having a lot of fledglings, birds who are just leaving the nest, who are just learning how to fly. Those fledglings are going to be a lot more vulnerable. They'll often be hopping around on the ground and may not quite have the skills to fly away fast enough from cats. So simple strategy, many of you may not have to consider it, but you're welcome to share that with the students you work with. Another strategy, adding a bird bath. So many of you are talking about a water source. Adding a simple thing like a bird bath can be quite beneficial for birds. Oftentimes people say, well, I don't know why the birds aren't coming. I have great bushes, I have native plants, I have good food sources, but it could be that they're lacking a water source. For those of you who are in the northern region like Ithaca, having a water source during the winter time is actually incredibly valuable and will add an even greater attraction to your habitat, to your garden. Because if you are in an area where you're going to have a lot of freeze over of water, a lot of snow, an open water source is very difficult for birds to find. And so having that can actually be quite beneficial. The only precaution I would give you with bird baths is make sure you're keeping them clean. If you have still water bath, as most places do, make sure you're changing that at least once a week, if not every few days, and just cleaning it out too to remove any algae that could be building up. If you have the opportunity, and especially if you're considering adding a bird bath, think about adding it into your application for request for funds of having a solar-powered bird bath or an electric bird bath that has a bubbler. That in the wintertime will help water from freezing over so that it does stay as an open water source. Another strategy that's less likely, but if you want to do this, make sure you have your maintenance staff made aware of it, is to leave leaf litter on site. Though it may be unsightly, though it may potentially kill grass if it's on a lawn, leaf litter is food. It is food for insects, and that could provide a lot of really good grub for those birds. Many bird species like to hop around on the ground, sift through leaves, searching for insects, and leaf litter provides a great shelter for their prey. Another strategy, some schools may have this opportunity, or educational sites may have this, is to have a snag. For those of you unfamiliar with what a snag is, that's basically a dead tree. So having a tree that is either dead or dying, as long as it's not at risk of destroying any kind of property, I recommend leaving it up. What this does is you'll commonly see woodpeckers, nuthatches, wood creepers, a lot of great wildlife that can actually eat the insects in that snag. Dead and rotting wood, again, insects are going to be flourishing in there, consuming that dead wood, and that's just a great food source for a lot of cool bird species. So let's talk about some that are a little more relevant to you guys. How about a nest box? Many schools we work with love the idea of building nest boxes, and why not? They're really fun to build. They get kids to learn practical skills such as woodworking, using tools and utensils, but then you can also monitor the nest boxes too and see the benefits of them. Nest boxes are providing that cover. They're a really wonderful activity to do and have in your garden. If you have any form of natural water source nearby, that's wonderful. Pond, stream, or other water area. And then many of you mentioned this, no use of herbicides or pesticides. The way I like to think of it, I don't grow my own vegetables currently. I don't have the space to, but if I had my own garden, how I would design it would have native plants in between all my vegetable rows. Theoretically speaking, I haven't done this before, but that's how I would do it, because the native plants would be attracting in your native insects, your local pollinators, but it also attracts in the birds, who many of which would eat the pollinators, but also eat some of the bad insects too that would be potentially damaging your produce. So the other reason why we don't want to use herbicides or pesticides is because those are technically toxins, and they can be toxic to some wildlife. So we want to be precautious with that. What most of you were saying, and what I've already mentioned previously, is providing native plants. And let's specifically highlight and talk about this importance of native plants. Now, before we justify, why native plants are the best thing in the world, let's just talk about how you can convince your non-believers, so to say. Native plants are going to be a lot less maintenance than ornamental plants, so to say. They have adapted to your climate. Again, we're going back to that climate component of ensuring garden success. They will require less water in many cases. They can withstand fluctuations in the weather. They are adapted to living in your area. So that helps reduce some of the maintenance. That will then help save energy, save money. You're less likely to have to replace plants over the years. And not only will that help save money, you'll also be supporting local wildlife. You'll be having to use less pesticides and herbicides because of that low maintenance, which will help have cleaner water runoff. And then again, it gives that opportunity to connect to nature. So understanding the significance of native plants. And that's where pollinators come into play. Many of you said you had a pollinator garden already at your educational site, and that's a wonderful garden to have. Now, thinking back evolutionarily, before introduced species really became an issue, insects and native plants evolved together. There are studies showing how many native pollinators have adapted mouthpieces. Their life cycles are dependent on specific plant species. And by introducing non-native species, we are thus disrupting that evolutionary path. And there are studies showing that by introducing these non-native species, we're actually decreasing biomass and decreasing biodiversity within these gardens, within these habitats. Now, pollinators those are specifically important because they are the food sources for our birds. So let's give you an example real quick. Lepidoptera. For those of you who don't know your insect groups, Lepidoptera are basically caterpillars. And they survive predominantly on 3 different tree species, but oak is going to be the predominant one. Now, imagine an oak tree. If you're fortunate to have a beautiful oak tree at your school site or educational site, you have lots and lots of caterpillars probably going there. So much so that you are supporting quite a lot of chickadees. This black-capped chickadee here, in one brood, so one cycle of nesting, they will need between 5,000 to 8,000 caterpillars to allow their young to survive and fledge. Now, a chickadee can have up to 2 broods during the breeding season. That means that they can consume between 10,000 to 16,000 caterpillars during the nesting season. Those are a lot of caterpillars, and we need to have the native plants to support the caterpillar population. And we need to have a strong caterpillar population to support these black-capped chickadees. And that's really where our connection is coming from, of why native plants are truly benefiting bird species. They are supporting the insect wildlife. They also produce other things such as berries and fruits that other different species can also use too, especially during the winter time. So these are the connections we really want to make, and the significance of native plants. For those of you who may already have a space that doesn't have an abundance of native plants, or maybe you do have quite a few invasive species, the first step is removing those invasive species. Other strategies you can use could be reducing the size of your lawn. If you have a massive lawn at home, at your educational site, in your school, try reducing that and allowing more native plants, either grasses, shrubs, trees, come into that area. That's going to provide better habitat for your birds. Looking at making better selections for your current garden by purchasing through local nurseries that support native plants. And then again, for those of you who may be up north in the nice cold winters, try growing those native plants in pots this winter and then planting them outside this spring and summer so they'll be established come next winter. Now I want to show you guys this Habitat Network website. And again, Habitat Network is our partnership between Nature Conservancy and the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And there's a citizen science project here. So the website is yardmap.org. And let me make sure, can everybody see that I'm on the Habitat Network website? I just want to make sure. Okay, good. I usually have Kelly right here to tell me that I do. So, excellent, good. We are on the Habitat Network website. And what we're going to do is we are going to go to the Explore tab. Quick orientation though. Habitat Network is all about collecting data on bird habitat. Now you can see they've had over 500,000 acres mapped and over 27,000 sites have been created. Now the main purpose behind Habitat Network is for you guys, citizens of the world, but really this is more the United States, are going to be drawing electronic maps to help us learn about habitat, and then based on that information we can start creating change to improve bird habitats. And what you'll see here is what the anatomy of a habitat map may look like. We're going to have a reference map on the bottom, and this is using Google Earth. Then you, the user, would create a site outline over the habitat map. Then you can identify different habitats. Is it pavement? Is it gravel? Is it lawn? Is it forest? Is it garden? And so that's really the key information that we're currently using right now of understanding the percentages of different habitat in different regions of the United States. And then you can add different objects as well. Do you have shrubs, trees, bird feeders? This could be brush piles, a beehive, a variety of aspects. So that's just the overarching idea behind Habitat Network. Now, along with being a citizen science project, it also has a wealth of knowledge and resources available. So I'm going to our Explore tab. Now, in our Explore tab, you have several different things you could look at. You can go through photo galleries, you can look at different featured sites. Here's a community, here's, most sites are backyards. However, occasionally you'll get a school like this Nature Walk Montessori school. There are a few different schools that are also mapped. But we're going to set those aside, and I want you to focus on the left-hand side here, your local resources. And this is an opportunity for you to enter in your zip code and learn about your ecoregion, pollinators, native plants, and resources specific to your region. So our zip code in Ithaca is 14850. And we're going to see what information it has for us. So based on our region, for those of you who didn't know where Ithaca is, we're right in the center of New York. Well, I've learned that we're a Laurentian mixed forest province, and I can see other regions that also are this ecoregion. For those who are unfamiliar about what an ecoregion is, it's a unique combination of living and non-living factors that set your landscape apart and determine what will flourish there. So it's basically deciding, you know, what will be unique to our area that will make sure we actually have a successful garden. Now, along with this, we have a full pollinator guide for our ecoregion. So let's look at this guide real quick. This is an extensive guide, 24 pages, but it's all about selecting plants for the pollinators of our ecoregion. Now, I'm going to scroll down. I've been through this guide quite a few times, but I know to scroll down further, it will tell me the different types of pollinators we have, what they're attracted to, yada, 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 food, water, cover, space. Keep scrolling down here, and this is the start of the different types of plants that we might be able to attract, what season they are. Again, we're looking at flowers, vines, perennials, trees, and shrubs. But I can specifically come down here to look at the botanical name. What is our species name of plant available? What's it commonly known as, such as American witch hazel? I know that if I wanted to plant some shrubs that were attracting bees or moths, I might look at, you know, American witch hazel. It's flowering during October, November. It likes shade to sun, so it seems to be a fairly adaptable plant. It likes moist soil, but it's going to help be visited by moths. That's our pollinator it's going to attract. I could look for species that are going to attract a greater diversity or maybe more birds. So hummingbirds here. This is our perennial flowers. A red columbine will help me attract both bees and hummingbirds. But I don't want that red columbine to be in the same region as my witch hazel. The witch hazel here liked moist soil, but our red columbine likes well-drained soil. So those couldn't go right next to each other. There is a wealth of information on this website, and you can get lost in it quite a bit, but this is an amazing tool for you to access and look at your local pollinator guide. Along with this, you can also check out what are birds within your area, who are local experts that you can talk to, learning your state's native plants. Again, this is very valuable. And the other option is to look at plant nurseries near you. I like this very much so because I can see in Ithaca, New York, what kind of local nursery may I want to support. I can see that in Dansville, they have 100% native plants. And so that's something where, you know, they're associated with the Wildflower Organization. They have 100% native plants. I might want to go to this nursery. So again, to get to this, you go to the Explore tab. On the left-hand side of the Explore tab on Habitat Network, this is where you're going to enter in your zip code to find your local resources. The only other thing I want to mention briefly on the Nature Conservancy and Cornell Labs Habitat Network site is under the Learn tab, they have hundreds of blogs. So based off what you want to go with, pollinators, design advice, food, water, birds, native plants, whatever, they have a whole series of tips and tricks to help you. What is a stream and how can we protect them? It's not just about birds. They really are trying to help create better habitat for wildlife in general. Now with this, we are actually working with a lot of schools that are making some great habitat improvements. These can be building bird gardens, creating pollinator gardens, building nest boxes, what have you. And that brings us to talking about citizen science. So I've mentioned this a few times. For the sake of time, we look at citizen science here at the lab, and we think of citizen science as citizens of the world. People everywhere are reporting observations of natural events, and they're following the basic scientific protocols to submit those observations. So in this image here, you see all these little tiny yellow dots. It could very well look like light pollution. However, we're seeing a lot of different shipping channels, it seems. And this is, in fact, data representing citizen science. Every single dot is a bird observation submitted to our largest database here at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, eBird. eBird is our largest citizen science project. It's one of the largest in the world. And you can see that it really is forming an outline of the world. And all this data being collected is truly forming a partnership between those citizens of the world, between everyday people and the scientists here who manage the citizen science projects. But with all that data, we're now able to answer real world questions that we never before were able to answer. Now, there are citizen science projects in a whole slew of topics. Birds is just the surface. And here at the lab, we have 6 projects, but there are hundreds out there, ranging from international like eBird to something that's very regional like the Great Lakes Worm Watch. So I do encourage you, though birds are really cool and I'm a little biased to birds, there are other projects there. Find a project that will meet your educational needs that your students will become passionate about. So just a quick plug for citizen science. And some of our amazing pollinator gardens are using citizen science projects outside of bird realm. They're using projects such as Journey North, Monarch Watch, or the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project through their pollinator garden. And that's because they are planting things like milkweeds to support monarch populations and study those. So there are many other ways to get involved within your garden. One easy way could be to actually start using the Habitat Network mapping system and going through the process of mapping your educational site, letting us know what type of habitat you have in your educational site. I want to give one quick case study about why birds are significant in the garden and how it can inspire full investigations. This is a class in New Jersey, a group of third graders. They were very excited to receive a couple bird feeders. They did some research. They filled out the feeders with some black wheel sunflower seed here. Looks like another mixed type of seed here, maybe millet. And they were really excited to start tracking birds up close to the window so they can get a really good look. But after a few weeks, they realized that there were no birds coming. So they started to do some research. Well, are there birds in our area? And they asked that question. So they went on a bird walk once in the morning to start learning about, are there birds in our area? If so, what types of birds are there? And they realized they do have lots of birds in their area, but they're still not coming to the window. So they decided to brainstorm ideas of what could be the reason birds are not coming to our feeders. They thought about, could it be the feeders? Could it be the seed type? But then they went back to thinking about food, water, cover, and space. And they realized that with this, all this space here, there really is not enough cover for the birds. And with such things as raptors, as predators, they really need to provide more cover for those birds. So they went through a full design process, again, thinking about the 4 components of habitat, but also considering the cover aspect for their birds. They have lower flowers, mid-level shrubs. They even have taller trees that's providing potentially food sources like an apple tree, could provide perching opportunities, but also help different birds use different canopy levels within their habitat. And then they went underway. These guys received a grant outside of the garden grant, separate from, and they received about $250, I want to say, to conduct this project. So they focused solely on native plants, on creating this bird-friendly habitat. And what was wonderful is by the end, they started this project in fall, they completed it in spring, and they did have birds arrive. And that's the exciting part behind this. Just a couple more things for garden success. The first thing I want to recommend is think about your summer break. If you are at a school that does have summer break, which many of you may be, either consider getting a summer school involved, consider getting a summer camp involved, your community involved, your parents involved. Many champions of gardens unfortunately get burned out because they are left maintaining the garden all summer long. Don't let that happen to you. Think about, can you create a timed irrigation system to help? And if so, make sure you budget for that. Speaking of budget, our final aspect, let's talk about funding. Now, this brings us to the BirdSleuth School Garden Grant. Real quick, again, this is funded by Alaska Fertilizer. They're a fish emulsion organic sponsor, and we're very grateful for them for providing us $25,000. And those $25,000 will be dispersed between 20 schools in the United States. Now, who qualifies? This grant is available for any public, private, or charter school that is K through 12 that's found within the United States. That does not include territories of the United States, just the 50 states. Unfortunately, just due to the restrictions of this grant, we cannot support homeschools, preschools, daycares, nonprofits, or international organizations at this time. Our sponsors are clear that we want to make sure that they are supporting schools directly. One small exception to that is if you are an informal organization or nonprofit that is working directly with a specific K through 12 school. I'll give you an example. We had a partnership this past year, the Children's Museum of Houston, and they worked directly with Edison Middle School to develop an amazing garden. And that partnership actually was incredibly valuable. We truly like those partnerships because it allows a local expert, an outlet resource to really guide the school through the formal process of creating a garden from scratch. Part of the grant Not only will you receive funding, the funding will be between $500 to $2,000. You'll also be receiving the BirdSleuth Habitat Connections Curriculum Kit. We do ask that you make your best effort to complete or at least partially the curriculum kit. Now, that curriculum kit is designed to go through creating a habitat improvement project. So you start with assessing your current habitat, building a online habitat network map, with then understanding how birds utilize the habitat, and then based on that information, making improvements, and that would be the implementation of your garden. You'll also receive gardening supplies from Alaska Fertilizer, which would include fertilizer, plant labels, signs, and so forth. Okay, I think I've covered everything. With that, I will be taking any questions. I realize I went a little long. It's 8:48 according to my watch. I'm happy to stay here as long as you guys have questions. Real quick, if anybody does have to dash out, I know somebody asked this earlier, you can receive professional development credit for attending this webinar. If you would like a letter of completion, please email us at birdsleuth@cornell.edu. Kelly would want me to suggest, please follow us on social media through Twitter or BirdSleuth. And then if by chance you have questions coming up later about this opportunity, about anything at all, please let us know. Kelly or myself are always monitoring your email address. We actually like to receive questions. It lets us know that people are interested in our stuff. So feel free to email us any questions that may come after this webinar. Okay. Jody, I see your question. Any suggestions for good bubblers or winter-worthy bird bats? I don't have a brand recommendation at this moment. Because we work at the national level and we don't currently have a sponsor, I actually don't know very much about bird bath brands. What I would do is seek out your local Audubon Society or seek out your local Wild Birds Unlimited. They will be far more knowledgeable about your current location and would recommend what to get. Any other questions? And you can enter these questions in the Q&A or in the chat window. The brand name of the fertilizer is Alaska Fertilizer. Alaska, like the state, they're not actually based in Alaska, but I believe it has the name Alaska because they use fish remains from harvested fish, and that's what they use to create fish emulsion fertilizer. How far away do you recommend roadways, parking lots? How far away from roadways or parking lots do you recommend gardens to be placed? That depends on the context of your location. The New Mexico garden I was telling you about at the Native American school was right along the fence with a highway just next to it. It depends on the goals of your garden, and that's really important to consider. Is the goal of your garden for produce solely? Let me clarify right now. If you're looking for produce solely gardens, you still qualify for this grant. You don't have to be creating a native pollinator garden for birds to apply for this grant. I just want to make sure that's clear. However, if your goal for the garden is around attracting birds, I would recommend you actually keep that garden further away from roadways, further away from parking lots. That will just help reduce noise population, reduce traffic, and you'll have a better chance of attracting more birds. The other thing to consider with roadways and parking lots is the permeability. Having a ground surface that is impermeable, meaning water cannot drain through it, may cause flooding issues or water runoff issues in your garden if you don't have raised beds. Just something to consider. Yes, Carol, you absolutely can ask for money to buy native plants. You can ask money to buy plants, buy lumber, buy tools. You can also request funds in addition to supporting the garden, to also support professional development as well, if you'd like. Yeah, Holly, so you're interested in removing phragmites from your stormwater retention pond and replacing with natives. You're asking about using herbicide in the fall or winter, and would it be okay to plant the native plants in the spring? Okay, I'm not a plant person by trade. First, I'd make sure the plants that you are looking into should be planted in the spring and not fall. That shouldn't be an issue, but just make sure those plants can be planted in the spring. The next thing, and the biggest mistake that most people make with herbicides, is overdoing it. Be sure to follow the instructions exactly. Adding too much herbicide could potentially kill off more than your phragmites. You could have a serious backlash in your kill-off rate in your stormwater retention area. That could cause to die off, that which could lead to lack of oxygen. I have a marine biology background, and I'm quite familiar with eutrophication, so that could lead to a whole bad thing. Just make sure you're following the directions for the herbicide, and it should be okay to get you started with native plants in the spring. Yes, the grant application. Let me put that information. One moment, Stephanie. Let me exit out of this. So theoretically, you guys should still be seeing my live screen. Our grant application, our URL is BirdSleuth.org. This is what our website looks like. Sneak peek, we're hopefully going to be getting a new website in the coming months. But for the garden grants, you'll see grants and giveaways right at our top. And there's school garden grants right there. The URL is birdsleuth.org/garden-grant. And I'm going to enter that in the chat window as well for you guys. This will have, one moment, you'll see right on here, it will have all the details for the entire grant program. You can meet one of our previous winners this past year and what they've done. You can learn more details about Alaska Fertilizer and our Habitat Connections curriculum kit. We have 3 different buttons on the site to apply now, so you shouldn't be able to miss those. It will list all the application and eligibility processes. It will have on here our recorded webinar of this session. I believe somebody just asked a question about that. So based off of this webinar, the recording will be made available here, but it also will be taking the questions asked in these 2 webinars we've hosted, and also develop a frequently asked questions next week to add to this page. The grants open August 21st and it closes on October 8th, 2017. That's this October 8th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. We are in Eastern Time here in Ithaca. You also, I highly recommend for everybody, we list your 6 questions you need to answer right here. All the questions are right here. Please plan in advance. The thing about this is, if you provide us, one-word answers, only a few sentences, you're not going to be considered. We've had so far nearly 300 applicants in just a couple weeks. We still have a whole month more, and we expect to get probably 600, close to it, between 600, 800, maybe even 1,000 applicants for 20 grants. So the more detail, the better. The other thing to consider is, here's the full timeline for the grant. When the grant availability is open, when winners, and it should say everybody, will be notified by October 20th about the status of the application. We do have an online training. You'll be sent the kit. There is a final report, but again, all of this information is on the website. Okay, Heidi. Our schoolyard has a vegetable garden with a great pollinator garden, but we do not have many trees. What would be our next step to get more birds? First, think about food sources. When I like to teach about food, water, cover, and space, Space is something I think is overlooked quite often, and not just space horizontally, but think of space as a vertical aspect. Think about many different canopy levels. It's nice, and most gardens will have the lower shrubs and grasses, but many are missing a lot of the higher canopy levels, taller shrubs and taller trees, which will help attract different bird species. And many feeders tend to be at eye level or higher for birds. So think about considering adding some taller shrubs potentially, and think about also adding bird feeders. One awesome link we have is all about DIY feeders, and that could be a really fun activity for you guys to add bird feeders to your area. That could be really fun to just quickly make. So Heidi, I'm going to copy the DIY feeders, and I'm posting that in the chat window right now. But you can also see the URL on our website. Okay, Erin, any suggestions for when students want to support both raptors and places for songbirds? They have been seeing lots of different birds at your school and want to support all kinds of birds. That sounds like a very friendly bird school. Well, it depends what kind of raptors you want to support, because there are many raptors who will eat songbirds, which, don't get me wrong, provides such a cool learning opportunity for kids. Having the kids watch their feeders and then see a Cooper's hawk swoop in front of them trying to hunt for one of the birds that was on the feeder is super cool. So just by having bird feeders up, you could potentially be attracting raptors. The flip side of that would be, based on the age group of your students, you may want to proceed cautiously. If they're too young and you know the Cooper's hawk does actually catch one of the birds, it may be a little traumatizing for some of the younger audiences or olders potentially. You know, I know adults who don't like that, but for those of you, just quick fun fact, if you do have Cooper's hawk or other raptors berating your feeders, then you can just take those bird feeders down for a couple days. The Cooper's hawk or whatever raptor will move on, and then you can proceed. The other option is to look at nest boxes. While I'm still sharing the screens, let me just close this out real quick. NestWatch, it's one of our citizen science projects. It's nestwatch.org. Again, entering in the chat window. Many of our citizen science projects have a Learn tab, and they have a really cool one that is called Right Bird, Right House. I'm hovering on it right now. So this is Right Bird, Right House. This is really cool because you can enter in, you can enter in your region. So I am currently in the Northeast, and you can enter in your primary habitat. So I do this for my parents actually, oftentimes. They live kind of, well, they have lake on one side and open woodland. Let's go with open woodland. And they'll immediately tell you nest box plans available, but they'll also tell you what type of species are in need. So my area, and I've done this with my parents, is to encourage building barn owl nest boxes. They have lots of squirrels that raid their feeders. So I tell them, okay, let's build a barn owl nest box. And that could be an option to help to track more raptors in the area and control pest problems. Eastern screech owls. The nice thing about this is it will tell you, how complex is it? Is the design kid-friendly or not? So let's look at this American robin one. It does require an email to download the construction plan, but it will give you all the details below before you download it about when you should be putting up the nest box, how high, the minimum spacing between nest box placements, if it needs to face a different way, and helpful tips. So that's a really cool one. So Holly, quick clarification then, with the phragmites, yes, very nasty invasive. There is an opportunity, or put it this way, it will not harm you to an extent to request in part of your budget to cover the cost of having somebody professional come in and remove invasives. We cannot guarantee that we can support all of your financial requests if we are awarding you a grant. The average grant is going to be around $1,200. Some people may get lucky and get the 2000s. Others will have to take cuts based on the requested funding. So if that's helpful to you to know, you may be able to budget for paying somebody professional to come remove your invasives. It also doesn't hurt to ask if they'll do it at a discount price or for free. So yes, Jennifer, last year you were not selected to receive a grant. It is possible to receive feedback on your application and how you can improve it. If you can, please email us, birdsleuth@cornell.edu. I'm going to pull that back up. It's on the page at the bottom, birdsleuth@cornell.edu. Send us an email. We save all our applications. And so I should be able to pull up your application from last year, and I can provide you personal feedback about what you guys can improve on. Do we have a plant list that tells which plants attract certain birds? Mexican sunflowers attract goldfinches. Okay, let me introduce you to another marvelous resource. Mary Leslie, let's go to Feeder Watch. And again, I know it's past 9 o'clock now. If you guys have to leave, feel free to email us at any point in time with other questions. I will be happy to answer them too. But I'm also happy to stick around for a little bit. So Mary Leslie, let's go to Feeder Watch here. You're asking about specific plants for specific birds. They don't have an exhausted or a complete list yet, but under their Learn tab, they have Common Feeder Birds Interactive. Is this what I want? I think this is what I want. Let me make sure this is. Let's view our bird list. Okay. So what you can do, you can look at your specific region, the food type, feeder type, but you should also be able to click on any one of these birds and it will tell you food type, feeder type. Maybe this isn't it. Maybe it's one moment. Let me see. It could very well be Habitat Network then. There's one site we have that you can click on a bird species and it will tell you the plants. Maybe it's this one. Yes, it's on Habitat Network. Okay, so how I found it, again, it's Habitat Network. The URL is yardmap.org. If you go to the Learn tab under Birds, they have a which birds, which plants. Now again, this list is not exhausted. It's not every single bird, but it will provide you where you can select your region, you can look at different food types, or you can click specifically on a bird species that you may be interested in attracting, and it will tell you different plants that it might be able to attract it. So for a hairy woodpecker, bark and woodborne beetle larvae, they could be looking for blackberries, hazelnut, acorns, beechnuts, and other arthropods. It'll tell you exactly what they eat. So here, this is an eastern bluebird. They'll tell you elderberry, hackberry, serviceberry, and you should be able to click on each of these, and they'll actually take you to, again, wildflower.org and tell you exactly which plant they are referring to. Okay, I hope that is helpful. I'm glad you said thanks, Holly. I'm not quite sure what your question was, but I'm glad I answered it. Glad I answered that. Let me see. I've answered all the questions, I think. Okay. Looking through the chat window, looking through the Q&A. At this point, I believe all the questions are answered. Oh, got another Q&A. Excellent. I'm glad that was helpful, Mary Leslie. So, Nancy, so butterfly gardens and bird gardens are not compatible. No, in fact, I would disagree. I think they work quite well. You do need to recognize that the birds may very well eat your butterflies, but they'll also eat other insects that are there too. Yes, caterpillars may be one of the insects they'll eat, but there are others besides just caterpillars. That one example with the black-capped chickadees, I mean, that is one of their favorite food sources. However, they are also going to eat other insects as well. So I wouldn't say they're not compatible. If you solely want to focus on butterflies, again, another horror story I've had, kids spent quite a long time rearing and raising the caterpillars to release them as they went through metamorphosis, and then as soon as they were butterflies, they spent the time and released the butterflies, and then of course all the birds came in and ate nearly every single butterfly. So that was great. Okay, but don't birds need caterpillars for young who can't eat seeds? Yes, sorry, Nancy. Okay, clarification. Yes, all birds, besides the American goldfinch, which is a strict vegetarian, all birds will need some form of protein for their nesting youngs. Caterpillars are not the only protein source. You're also going to have a lot of bees, a lot of mayflies, you're going to have moths. There are a lot of other food sources besides caterpillars as well. So the other aspect you have to look at this is a natural cycle. Many bird species will either produce extra young, knowing that not all young will survive, to still pass down the lineage. And the same thing is with insects. Butterflies are going to produce a lot of young, knowing that birds are going to eat some of them. So it's not like you're going to deplete the butterfly population. So if you do want a butterfly garden, you're also supporting bird populations, but birds aren't the #1 enemy. Hopefully that answers your question. Okay. And if that confused you completely, Nancy, I think the hard part is I can't hear your responses verbally. So if you're still confused, feel free to give us a call as well. Our phone number is on our website. Web links that are shared in this website. Ooh. Yes, what we do, Matt, is we actually, in our archived video that goes up on YouTube, what we do is in the description section on that YouTube video, we'll have all supporting website links there. I should be able to be posting that video tomorrow. And so feel free to come back to the Garden Grant website or look on our YouTube page. The archive video of this should be there with all the links I've shared tonight. Are there any other questions? Aw, shucks. Thanks, Matt. Yep, I recognize you guys, we are past 9 o'clock, but thank you so much for coming out tonight. I hope I answered some of your questions to the best of my ability. Well, it was to the best of my ability. I hope it was clear enough for you guys. I will hang out for a few more minutes if people still have questions. Again, if you would like a letter of completion, feel free to email us and request that. If you have any other questions, if you want me to review past applications that you may have applied and I can give you advice, let us know. We want you guys to succeed. It's heartbreaking, and I kid you not, I cry every time I go through this stage because there are hundreds of people we have to turn away. It's that unfortunate, but it's also really inspiring to see that there are this many educators dedicated to helping kids get their hands dirty. So you guys make me incredibly happy. So feel free to reach out if you guys have any questions. I'm going to mute myself, but I'll hang out for the next couple minutes in case there are last minute questions. Thank you guys and have a wonderful night.